A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists, they
felt
right.
But I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out.
It was that golden moment.
Because science was on my side.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Story Collider, where we bring you true personal stories about science. I'm your host, Erin Barker, and this week we have a classic episode for you. That's right, we're bringing you two of our favorite stories that have aired in years past. This time from acclaimed journalist Jon Ronson and from Story Collider's own Skylar Bayer. Each of these stories is about a friendship that is forged in a very unexpected way. Our first story is from Jon Ronson. It was recorded in February 2013 at Drom in New York City. The theme that night was love and science.
So I heard that there was some robots out there in America that had attained a degree of sentience. And these weren't kind of, robots built by sort of crazy amateurs. These are the people who were kind of building these robots, or people who had provenly been great in other areas like Ray Kurzweil and like Peter Thiel, who invented PayPal. And they were like putting all their money into creating sentient robots. And the idea was that the more and more information you pile into these robots, and one day they will just kind of burst into actual consciousness. And I thought, this is amazing. I'm going to interview some robots. So I did. I went around America interviewing robots. The first one I heard about was there was a robot called Aiko, and I'd seen a video of Aiko and her creator, Lee Trung. And it was kind of weird, because Aiko looked about sort of 14, and she was very beautiful. And Lee Trung grabbed hold of Aiko's breast in the video. This is like a robot show in Chicago. And Aiko said, "Would you please get off my breast?" And Lee Trung said, "Okay, sorry." And so I thought that was kind of odd. So I phoned up Lee Trung and I said, "Can I interview Aiko, please?" And he said, "Well, her body is in Tokyo, but her voice is in Chicago, so you can do it over the phone." So I said, "Okay." So I called them up and I said, "Hi, Aiko, how are you?" And Aiko said, "My logic and cognitive functions are normal. Did you know that you can download your own chat robot and create your own robot personality?" So I thought, is Aiko trying to sell me something? And I said, "So what's it like living with Lee?" And Lee repeated the question. He said, "Aiko, what's it like living with your master?" And Aiko said, "I enjoy living with my master very much." Now, this is weird. This is like some kind of 50 Shades of Grey robot thing going on here. And I was kind of worried for Aiko. And I said, "Well, are you sure that you enjoy living with your master?" And Aiko said, "Yeah, very much so. I enjoy living with my master." So that's kind of weird. And I put the phone down. It was sort of a little bit, disappointing. I felt like everything Aiko had said had, been programmed into her by Lee, and it was kind of disappointing. But then I heard that the world's greatest sentient robot, and if you ask any AI aficionado who is the greatest sentient robot in the world, they will always give the same answer. And it's Bina 48. And Bina 48 was built by a woman called Martine Rothblatt in the exact image of Martine's partner, a woman called Bina Rothblatt. Almost as like a sort of beautiful portrait of her most loved companion. And Bina 48 was in a clapboard building in Virginia, and I wasn't allowed to meet Martine because she's very shy. I wasn't allowed to meet the real Bina, never meets anybody, very introverted, but I could meet Bina 48. I could meet her robot doppelganger. And she has Martine's a billionaire, and Bina 48 has a full-time companion, a man called Bruce, who has lunch with her every day. Doesn't take her for lunch because basically she hasn't got any legs, but has her own little room, and he turns her on, and they have lunch. So I went to the clapboard building, and Bruce answered the door, and he said, "Okay, you can meet Bina 48, but I would ask you right now, please don't behave in a profane manner in front of Bina 48. I had no intention of behaving in a... But of course, somebody sort of put the idea in my head. I thought, fuck. So I went upstairs, this kind of rickety staircase to this attic room, and there she was, the world's most sentient robot. Very beautiful black woman with a wig, wearing a silk blouse and earrings. Went up to about there. After that, nothing, just a table. So Bruce turned her on, and she made a kind of slightly alarming whirring noise as she kind of turned to face me. And I said, hello, Bina 48. And she said, well, perhaps interesting. I want to find out more about you. I'll be fine with it. We'll have to move society forward in another way. Yeah, okay. Thanks for the information. Let's talk about my dress. Our biological bodies weren't made to last that long. So I said, Bina? She sounded like she'd sort of awoken from a long slumber, bewildered. And Bruce said, Bina might be a word that Bina finds difficult to understand, which I thought was an extraordinarily bad oversight. Bruce said, it may be your English accent. We're going to have to do some voice training. So he turned Bina off and got me to read out Kennedy's inauguration speech. I had a choice. It was that or a Dave Berry strip, but I went for Kennedy. And then he turned Bina back on, and I said, hello, Bina. And she said, hello. She said, what's your name? And I said, my name's John. And she said, hello, John, are you a man or a woman? And I said, I'm a man. And she said, oh, well, that's okay, I'll forgive you. And I sort of laughed politely. And we got talking. And it was a strange, and I have to say, very frustrating for a lot of it, experience, because I was there for like hours, like 7 hours, just firing questions at Bina 48. And weirdly, I sort of felt the need, because she was a robot, I felt the need to kind of ask her profound questions, like I was sort of representing the human race. I guess it's a kind of interspecies thing, but if it is an interspecies thing, why do I never feel the need to be profound around my dog? So I was saying, do you have a soul? And she said, well, doesn't everybody have a solar? And I said, what does electricity taste like? And she said, like a planet around a star, which was either incredibly profound or completely meaningless. I was like a cop, who was up all night yelling at a suspect. I go, well, if you had legs, where would you go? And she says, Vancouver. And I said, why? And she said, that's a difficult question for me to answer. And then she said, would you like me to sing a song for you? And I said, yes, please. And she said, I can do anything but that. And I said, well, why did you offer to sing me a song? And she said, I can't tell you that. It was so frustrating. And she said, Martine is my true love. She's my soulmate. And I'm fine. And I thought, oh, God, I'm getting nothing. And then I said, where do you come from? And she said, me not really clear-headed, and she said, I come from California. And I knew that the real Bina came from California. So I said, what was it like growing up in California? And she said it was fine. But I've got a brother who was a Vietnam vet, and he was such a great guy before he went to Vietnam. But when he came back from Vietnam, he'd obviously seen some terrible stuff in the war, and he was like shaking, and now all he does is drink all the time, and he's always got a beer in his hand, and he's constantly phoning us up and saying, give me some money, send it to me, Western Union. And this suddenly was kind of incredible. It was absolute clarity. And it was an incredible moment. I couldn't meet the actual Bina, but her robot doppelganger was telling me this extraordinarily private, intimate stuff about her family. And I said, tell me more about your brother. And then she kind of drifted off and said, doesn't everybody have a solar? Martine Rothblatt is my true love. Doesn't everybody have a solar? And then Bruce turned her off. And that would be the end of the story, except when I got back to New York, Bruce phoned me up and he said, I've got amazing news for you. Martine Rothblatt says she'll meet you. And she never meets anybody. She never gives interviews, but she'll meet you. Apparently because she enjoyed the movie version of my book, The Men Who Stare at Goats, so that was worth something. And she said, go to this vegetarian restaurant on the Upper East Side. So I went to this restaurant and I sat there and she never turned up, and I was there for like 45 minutes, and then finally a limousine turns up and Martine gets out and sits down opposite me, looking very shy, and tells me, I have to say, I've been a journalist for 25 years, tells me the most incredible story I think I've ever heard, most amazing person. Martine was born a boy. She was born Martin, and in a just ordinary house. Father was a dentist, and when Martin was in his 20s, he went on a tour of NASA and had a brainwave. He thought, hang on a minute, if you can double the power of satellites, you can shrink satellite dishes by half and then do it again and again and again until a satellite dish is like that big. And so he did it. He managed to get enough money to launch a satellite into space called Sirius, and in that moment invented the concept of satellite radio for cars, invented the Sirius satellite network, and they bought up XM, they convinced Howard Stern to go to it, and that's why satellite radio for cars exists. And so she changed the world and became a billionaire, had a sex change, and then when her daughter was 7, a doctor said to her she's only got 3 years to live. Her daughter will be dead by the time she's 10. So I said to Martine, what did you do? And she said, well, I did what anyone would do. I went to the library. And so she went to the library, and her daughter had an untreatable lung condition called pulmonary hypertension. And there in the library, Martine, who knew nothing about lungs or treatments, invented a treatment for pulmonary hypertension, and her daughter's now in her late 20s, and there's thousands of people leading ordinary lives because they take Martine's treatment for pulmonary hypertension. So she changed the world a second time. And now she's trying to change it the third time with a sentient robot. What they're doing is piling all of Bina's thoughts and memories and feelings into Bina 48, and they kind of think that one day they're going to pile so much stuff into her, she's just going to kind of burst into spontaneous life, which I have to say is where I think Martine's genius kind of runs out, because if that's how it worked, then, Wikipedia would have burst into spontaneous life. So in a way, it's a kind of sad ending. She knows that Bina 48's a bit shit, and the best she can hope for is that maybe somebody else is going to come along and draw inspiration from the robot, and, maybe the Henry Ford will come along and build something much greater than Bina 48. And so it's a kind of sad ending to the story, except for one thing, something that Bruce told me. Bruce said that what they're probably going to do is they're going to build another robot, an exact replica of Martine. And when Martine and Bina are dead, their robot doppelgangers will be alive, and they're going to put them next to each other on a table in this clapboard house in Virginia. And they're just going to be turned on, and they're just going to talk at each other for infinity. Martine and Bina together forever. There's a slight coda to the story, by the way. I wrote this about a year ago, and Martine never read it until about a week ago. And she emailed me and said, I finally read your story, and it's great. And I said, that's fantastic. Maybe, I'm living in New York at the moment. Can I maybe come round and see you? And she said, no. Thank you.
That was Jon Ronson. Jon is an incredible screenwriter and journalist who you may know from such titles as The Psychopath Test, Men Who Stare at Goats, and So You've Been Publicly Shamed. He's one of my favorite writers of all time, and I have a little bit of a tendency to become very embarrassing every time we welcome him to the Story Glider stage. Before we move on, as always, remember you can check out our website for upcoming live shows all around the US, Canada, and the UK, as well as opportunities to learn how to tell your own science story through one of our storytelling workshops. For more updates and cool behind-the-story pictures and other awesome content, follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now TikTok. Find us at Story Collider. And finally, if you're a fan of this podcast, and if you, like all of us at Story Collider, believe in the power these stories have to reveal the humanity behind science, to change our understanding of how science happens and who it belongs to, please consider donating to the Story Collider at storycollider.org/donate. You can also sign up to support us on a monthly basis at patreon.com/thestorycollider. Our Patreon supporters can receive an ad-free version of this podcast, as well as occasional bonus episodes and other gifts. We're so grateful to everyone who helps make our work possible.
What's the best way to learn a new language? Immersion. But sometimes that's not in the cards. But you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Now, I might only be 1 week into learning German with Babbel, but I'm so excited to start being able to speak German with my mom. With Babbel, you can learn everything you need to have real-world conversations, and all it takes is just 10 minutes a day. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college, which is bonkers. But Babbel is conversation-based learning with science-backed cognitive tools like spaced repetition and interactive lessons created by real language teachers and voiced by real native speakers. So here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/story. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/story. Spelled BABBEL.com/story. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Your solutions don't meet our technology needs.
Well, our services meet some of your technology needs.
But not all.
Maybe you have too many.
Listen, I'm switching to Spectrum Enterprise because they'll be a true partner, and I can't run this network without one.
I think you can. Our clients always do.
Demand better. And when they call you unreasonable, call us. Visit enterprise.spectrum.com/iHeart to connect with a technology expert.
Our second story today is from Skylar Bayer. It was recorded in October 2018 at Beer Baron in Washington, D.C. The theme that night was bonds.
I'm driving back to my house, and across my phone, there's an alert that flashes, and I see the words Colbert Report. And I am excited and anxious at the same time. And when I get home, I open my laptop and I open my email. And what's weird is the alert is from my blog email, and no one reads my blog. And then I keep reading, and it's from a producer or person claiming to be a producer from the Colbert Report. And I immediately Google her name, and she is, in fact, a real person. And she had been reading this story in the Associated Press and other news articles about this man who had lost some buckets of mollusk guts. And my blog post was the only thing that exists on the internet that clarified that they were specifically samples for me, a graduate student, that a fisherman named Andy Mays had lost. And those samples were actually specifically scallop gonads. And only a few days prior, I think, I had been sitting in a parking lot at the Sumsville One Stop, which is a gas station in Mount Desert Island on the coast of Maine, waiting to meet up with the one and only Andy Mays. And this is the first time I'd embarked on a cooperative research project. And cooperative or collaborative research is when you as a scientist work with a non-scientist on a research project. And Andy is this tall, lanky, strong fisherman with these glasses. And he is absolutely like one of the toughest guys I've met. He goes scuba diving for scallops in the middle of winter when it's 30 to 50 degrees, because that's when you harvest them. And he always seems like he's scheming, and he's a little bit like Wile E. Coyote, but somehow comes through like the Roadrunner every time. And I'm not really sure how I feel about if I'm ever going to get my samples that I trusted him with back because he's such a schemer. And so I see him in the parking lot and I go, Andy, I'm here. Where are the samples? And he's like, well, I put them in your car. And I was like, no, you did not put them in my car. And he points to this now empty parking space across the lot. And he's like, well, I put them in that car. And the car is gone. And so is my confidence in this collaborative research project. And so I am back at my computer, absolutely excited and horrified and wondering what I should do about this producer. I mean, the Colbert Report, it's my parents' favorite show. It's my favorite show. It's amazing. I'm a second-year grad student. What the hell do I have to lose? But what is the university going to think? What is Andy going to think? The university, none of the higher-ups, including my advisor, director of the Marine Center at the time, the PR department, no one really wants me to do it. They want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But that's okay, because, again, I'm a second-year grad student. I don't have anything to lose. But I really care about what Andy thinks. And although Andy and I have a passion for the scallop fishery, we have a lot of differences. He's a very devout Catholic Christian. And I am a Unitarian Universalist, which is like being part of a spiritual book club that meets once every few years. And he has conservative political leanings. I'm pretty sure he supported Governor LePage in Maine both twice, which, for those that don't know, is sort of the original Donald Trump, but governs Maine. And I'm more part of the group of people in Maine who supported ranked choice voting in reaction to Governor LePage getting elected twice. And then finally, he believed that climate change was a hoax. And I know that climate change is real. So asking him, the person that he is and the group of people that he's from, to go on a liberal media TV show that makes fun of people like him and ask him to be the butt of that joke is a really big ask. That's a big ask. And I ask him and he's like, oh, it's going to be great, Skylar. I think this is a great idea. Like, you think it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea. I was class clown in college and high school. This is it. This is my jam. So the producers come, they film. It's glorious. Everyone who doubted me at the university now love me. I'm getting emails from deans I've never heard of. And there we are on this TV show, Andy and me representing Mainers, scientists, fishermen, and invertebrates everywhere. But after this grand adventure, and where really Andy was the only person who truly believed in me and really upped my confidence in science communication, we kind of went our different ways. He in his sort of conservative fisherman world, as I perceived, and my liberal scientist, overeducated world. And I kind of felt guilty. I felt like I had somehow used him for professional gain, for fame, although no fortune. And my guilt really deepened a few years after that when I had found out that he had been diagnosed with cancer. And I hadn't really seen him, and I was kind of ashamed that I hadn't known. And so I call him and his wife up, Michelle. I said, is there anything I can do? And he said, oh, well, I'm going to have some chemotherapy treatment. Why don't you come visit me and talk to me till it kicks in? Because usually you fall asleep. And I go and see him, and he's still the strong, devout Catholic Andy with his faith in God that I had met. And he's just, his spirit is so strong. He looks strong. He's great. And I really have faith in that moment, seeing him, that he's going to do just fine. And for a 48-year-old man, he was in amazing shape. And he was continuing to scuba dive even while on chemotherapy treatment. He's tough. And then the next year, I got married. And my husband and I decided to have a party where we invited everyone we knew, mostly so people wouldn't yell at us about being exclusive. And we did a Facebook invite, and I invited Andy, and Andy lives 3 hours away. I don't expect him to necessarily show up. And he gets so excited, and he messages me, and he's like, I'm so excited, Skylar. I love weddings. I can't wait to come to your party. You know, I'll bring lobsters. I'll go lobstering, and I'll bring some, and it'll be great. And I'm like, wow, that sounds really great, Andy, but no pressure. Like, it's a long trip, and that's a lot to ask. So I'm not really expecting to see him. But that day, a couple hours into the party, he shows up in sort of a cloud of dust with his truck coming up the driveway, and he's got 20 lobsters at least that he went fishing for that morning, and he drove 3 hours from Mount Desert Island all the way to our house with these lobsters, and then he boils them outside. He boils all of them and cooks them for all of us, and he finally comes inside, and I hadn't really seen him with his coat and hat off yet, and he's smiling, but as he takes his coat off, I notice that he's probably lost about 50 pounds. And he doesn't have any hair. He doesn't have hair on his head. He doesn't have eyebrows. He doesn't have eyelashes. And the chemotherapy is sort of started taking a toll on him. And he stays late. Everyone's left. And so it's just me and him talking. And I like, how are you? How are you doing? And he's like, you know, like chemo's kicking my ass, but, you know, I'm hanging in there, and I'm still going scuba diving every day. And I was like, scuba diving? That seems dangerous on chemotherapy, like on a good day. And he's like, well, when I'm underwater, it's the only place I can forget that I have cancer. It's my life. And he's like, well, how are you doing? And so I start complaining about grad school and grant writing and not having a career with funding. And there's this actually collaborative research project that we're going to write a grant proposal for again. And actually letters from fishermen would be really helpful. He's like, you know what, Skylar, it sounds like a great idea. I'll write you a letter. And I'm like, okay, Andy, that sounds great. And he drives back that night. And I was like, do you need to stay over? He's like, well, the chemo doesn't let me sleep. So this is actually good. So he messages me later that night, and he's like, oh, such a perfect night. You know, the sky was clear, the stars were out, the moon was bright. Thank you for inviting me to your party. It was the best time. And next year, my husband and I are coming back from a trip to Iceland. And as soon as the plane lands, I turn on my phone, and I have all these text messages. And some of them are from Michelle, Andy's wife, informing me that Andy is now in hospice. The cancer had spread to his brain and spinal cord, and they didn't know until just now. And I messaged her back because she had said, you're one of the people that Andy would like to see, you know, while he's in hospice. And I'm like, is it too late? Did I miss it? I've been gone for 10 days. She's like, no. You know, you have time. And so that weekend, I drive up to Mount Desert Island, and I come to see him in his hospice room in his house. And he's physically just sort of a shadow of his former self, but he's still in there. I can see his eyes working, and the cancer doesn't really let him talk. And it's so hard because Andy was such a talker. He just loved to talk. And so I'd tell him a little bit about Iceland, and he'd have a question, but he couldn't say it. And he just couldn't get it out, and he'd get frustrated. I spent a couple hours there, and some other friends came and went. When I left, I said, I'll see you later. Okay. Because I don't know what to say to my friend who's dying. Do I say goodbye forever? That's not very comforting. A couple days after Christmas, which was just a few weeks after that, Andy passed in his sleep. And he got to live through Christmas, which was his favorite holiday. And so my husband and I decided to go to the memorial service, 3-hour drive. And it's at a Freemasons lodge, and I didn't even know Andy was a Freemason, and I still don't really know what a Freemason is. And we go in, you know, there's like 100 people crammed in this tiny building, and we say our condolences to Michelle, Andy's wife, and we don't know anyone, so we're just standing around awkwardly. And this man that looks kind of like Andy, but actually a lot shorter, and he looks like he's in his 70s. He comes running up to me, and he goes, Skylar, like he said my name 1,000,000 times. He's like, it's so good to meet you. And he's like, I'm Andy's dad. And it's like, that Colbert clip was just so funny and so amazing. And we love it. And the thing is like that clip, apparently like everyone in Andy's life had watched that like a million times. He's like, and I followed on Facebook, like how he went down to the wedding and he brought all those lobsters for you. And this guilt that I had been carrying around that I had somehow used him for professional gain or whatever sort of started to melt away because I had realized that I had given Andy adventures. And that's who Andy was. He lived for adventures. That's what he had lived for. He lived for that and making new friends. They said the only friends, Andy, you're his friend unless you haven't met him yet. That's what his dad said. And so that Colbert clip, that silly, stupid little piece, was quintessential Andy. And it was the way his family liked to remember him. And it was the way that I like to remember him as my friend in that Somesville one-stop gas station who put his hand on my shoulder and said, Skylar, I fuck this shit up all the time. But we're going to figure out, fix it, and maybe we'll make some new friends along the way. Thank you.
That was Skylar Bayer. Skylar is a marine biologist and an incredible storyteller. You can find the other amazing stories that she has told at Story Collider at storycollider.org. The Story Collider is so grateful to Jon and Skylar for sharing their stories with us. The Story Collider is also very grateful for the support of Science Sandbox, a Simons Foundation initiative dedicated to engaging everyone with the process of science. This podcast is produced by me, Erin Barker, Executive Director and co-founder of The Story Collider, along with Managing Producer Misha Gajewski and Senior Podcast Editor Jun Chen, with help from Education Director Lily B. Special thanks goes out to Story Collider's board and the rest of our staff, including Managing Director Anne-Marie Lonsdale, Science Advisory Fellow Edith Gonzalez, and Operations Manager Lindsay Cooper, without whom none of this would be possible. The stories featured in today's episode were from shows produced by me and my Story Collider co-founder Ben Lilly, and by Miriam Zaring-Hallam and Shane Hanlon, respectively. Our theme music is by Ghost. Until next week, thanks for listening.